Miss Rhodes stood at the front of her small classroom, clasping her hands together in anticipation. She could feel the hum of restlessness that always accompanied her seventh grade language arts class after lunch. Afternoon sunlight lit up the posters of famous literary quotes on the walls. Lines from Maya Angelou, Langston Hughes, and Pablo Neruda glowed brightly, as though urging everyone to speak their truth. Ms. Rhodes had taught language and literature for nearly 10 years, but she still felt a thrill whenever she introduced a new project. Today, she felt a special eagerness. Her dear cousin worked as a nurse at the local hospital, and she had recently told Ms. Rhodes about a 10-year-old boy named Sawyer who was battling a serious illness. Day in and day out, he lay in a quiet, sterile hospital room. His parents visited when they could, his mother every day, his father less often due to long shifts at a factory. And Sawyer's life had become confined to beeping monitors and hushed conversations. The teacher tried to imagine what those days must be like for the boy. The thought of it pulled at her heart. Miss Rhodes cleared her throat, addressing the cluster of 20-some students. Class, I'd like to talk to you about a special assignment. She glanced at the clock. 1:05 p.m., right on time. There's a child in the hospital named Sawyer. He's 10 years old, and he's spending most of his days there while undergoing treatment. I thought we could do something to bring him some joy. The class grew silent. Even the usual talkers at the back, who tended to spend more time doodling than paying attention, leaned in. Perhaps it was the tremor of compassion in Ms. Rhodes's voice or the mention of a hospitalized child that piqued their interest. Regardless of the reason, for once, every student was listening intently. I want each of you to write Sawyer a letter, Ms. Rhodes continued. Tell him about yourself, what games you like to play, what books you enjoy reading, maybe a story from your life. Something uplifting. You might offer him hope, encouragement, humor. Think of it like a pen pal assignment, but we're going to be dropping off these letters in person at the hospital. Well, I am, on your behalf. A hand shot up. It belonged to Naomi, a bright-eyed girl who was often shy but opened up whenever the topic of reading essays and stories came along. She asked, "Will he respond to us? Like a real pen pal?" "I hope he will," Ms. Rhodes said warmly. "Illness can be isolating, and he might love to have new friends. Let's start by writing him one meaningful letter each. Then, if he responds, perhaps you can write him back." Another hand rose, this time from James, a boy who ordinarily fussed with his baseball cap and tried to avoid complex writing assignments. "Do we have to do this for a grade?" he inquired somewhat uneasily. Miss Rhodes smiled. "Let's consider it a project. I'll read them to make sure they're appropriate and kind, but the purpose here isn't about grammar or spelling. It's about compassion. It's about using the power of words to shine some light in one person's life. You'll all get credit, of course, but more importantly, you might make a real difference to someone who could use a little brightness." A subtle ripple of excitement passed through the room. Even the more reluctant students felt moved. Writing an actual letter to someone in need was different from typical essays or book reports. It felt personal, relevant. Soon, the class was asked to divide up the time. Miss Rhodes allotted 30 minutes for brainstorming and writing a single draft, and the assignment's final versions would be due the next day. Immediately, pens and pencils began scratching across paper. The gentle hum of creativity filled the classroom. Miss Rhodes walked up and down the rows, quietly tuning into the little bits of personality revealed on each page. Naomi wrote about her passion for reading fantasy novels and how the heroes always believed in themselves, no matter how daunting their quests. She tried to encourage Sawyer to find that hero within himself. James wrote about his baseball games, describing the feeling of stepping up to the plate and how you never know what might happen next. He compared his unpredictability on the field to the unpredictability of life, an earnest gesture that Miss Rhodes had never quite seen from James before. Amelia, a new student from another country, wrote about missing her old friends and adjusting to a new life. She said she understood how loneliness felt, but believed that letters could connect hearts across distances. That evening, Miss Rhodes read each letter. Tears formed at the corners of her eyes even as she smiled. The day's lesson had accomplished so much more than teaching letter writing skills. The students were gentle, compassionate, and thoughtful, pouring bits of their hearts onto paper for a boy they'd never met. She carefully packed them into a large yellow envelope, looking forward to delivering them. The hospital's lobby smelled faintly of disinfectant and plaster, with glaring fluorescent lights overhead. Ms. Rhodes wore a brave face as she carried the parcel of letters through the corridors. The staff recognized her from the conversation she'd had with her cousin and directed her to Sawyer's room. Inside, she found a boy with tousled brown hair lying against a pillow, his cheeks pale, but his eyes bright with curiosity. He looked small amid the towering machines, the IV line secured to his hand. His mother, a kindly woman wearing a sweater that had frayed cuffs, was perched on a nearby chair, reading a worn paperback. She welcomed Miss Rhodes with a grateful nod. "These are for you," Miss Rhodes said softly, handing Sawyer the envelope. "There are letters from my students, seventh graders at Springwood Middle School. They've been thinking about you, rooting for you." Sawyer's eyes lit up and a faint smile appeared on his face. He flicked his gaze from Miss Rhodes to his mother, to the envelope. Carefully, he opened it and pulled out the top letter, reading bits aloud with growing excitement. Naomi's letter was on flowery stationery. She'd drawn a small castle in the margin and a dragon breathing glittery fire. Ms. Rhodes noticed how Sawyer's grip tightened around the letter as though he was clinging to a lifeline. Each word he read seemed to lift his spirit, as if the ordinary hospital walls around him began to shift into scenes out of the fantasies Naomi loved so much. Day after day, Ms. Rhodes's class asked for updates. Did Sawyer like our letter? Did he say anything? When will we hear back? Ms. Rhodes could hardly keep up with their eagerness. She asked the hospital staff to pass along a message to Sawyer. If he felt up to it and wanted to respond, they would be thrilled to hear from him. It wasn't until a week later that Ms. Rhodes found a smaller envelope in her school mailbox. Inside were homemade thank you cards, each with the name of a specific student printed carefully on the front. Sawyer had worked with his mother to craft quick, heartfelt replies. Naomi's card had a beautiful, albeit shaky, drawing of a dragon blowing kisses instead of fire. James's card was a simple baseball glove sketch with a speech bubble. "You miss 100% of the shots you don't swing at." A mix-up of sports references that caused James to laugh. Amelia's card showed a small plane flying over an unfamiliar city skyline, linking two places with a rainbow. Other students' cards each had something sweet and personal. The entire class found themselves transfixed by the power of words. They discovered they could be as warm and welcoming as a hug. As the weeks rolled by, Miss Rhodes noticed a shift in her students. They collaborated more in group projects. They listened more intently when their peers shared stories in class. Communication about feelings became a frequent occurrence. That transformation in the classroom paralleled the transformation in Sawyer's life. His mother confided to Ms. Rhodes in a phone call that the letters were sometimes the only bright spot in his day. Another round of chemotherapy might knock him into a slump, but as soon as a new letter arrived, Sawyer held onto it like a talisman. He would read and reread them, memorizing lines and doodling additions in the margins. In return, he continued sending responses, some quite short, others lengthier if he felt stronger. One weekend, curiosity overcame Ms. Rhodes, and she visited Sawyer again. This time, she noticed the hospital walls near his bed covered in colorful notes and drawings, each pinned up for him to see. The boy explained shyly, "I like to look at them. It's like all these people in your class are in here with me, cheering me on. I don't feel so alone when I see their pictures and read their words." Through these letters, a subtle but potent magic took root. Sapphire, a girl who rarely spoke in class because English wasn't her first language, found out from Sawyer's mother that Sawyer loved soccer. She scoured the dictionary to write him a note about her country's soccer team and how she hoped one day he might attend a real match. Another student, Toby, composed a poem for Sawyer, though Toby had never shown an interest in poetry before. He wrote about courage, likening it to a tiny candle flame bravely dancing in the wind. Sawyer wrote back that he was going to keep Toby's poem in his pajama pocket. He said it made him brave. Outside the hospital, the students' families took notice. Parents started to ask Miss Rhodes about Sawyer. Some families included small gifts, a handmade crochet blanket, a puzzle, or a fun bedtime book. But Miss Rhodes always made sure that each item was accompanied by personal words, reminding everyone that it was the messages of hope that mattered the most. Despite the outpouring of support, Miss Rhodes fought back the worry that gnawed at her mind. Sawyer's medical situation was complicated. The boy's mother shared vague details about the seriousness of his condition. Risky treatments were on the horizon, and the outcome remained uncertain. Ms. Rhodes could hear the exhaustion and anxiety in the mother's voice whenever they spoke, but the mother never failed to add one note. Those letters are saving my boy's spirit. They remind him there's a future waiting for him outside the hospital. One afternoon, Miss Rhodes decided to give her students a choice: submit an essay about a book they'd studied, or write a second letter to Sawyer. Instantly, nearly every hand shot up for the letter option. She gave them free rein. They could share jokes, short stories, allusions from the classics they read, or just random positive thoughts. It became a tradition every Monday for the rest of that semester. The class wrote Sawyer letters as a warm-up. The teacher marveled at how eagerly they engaged in the activity. Students who usually dreaded Monday mornings now arrived early, notebooks in hand. They found it comforting to write to him, and in doing so, they shared a piece of themselves. Sawyer's medical challenges continued. He had ups and downs. Some weeks he'd be cheerful enough to reply. Other weeks, Miss Rhodes only received a brief text from Sawyer's mother saying he was too fatigued. Whenever there was a lull in letters, the students grew worried, but Ms. Rhodes reassured them. Some wrote gentle messages: "We miss you, Sawyer. Everything you're going through is so tough, but we believe in you." Winter arrived. The holiday spirit softened the chill in the air. The students insisted on sending Sawyer a Christmas box filled with letters snugly sealed in festive envelopes. One letter from Dylan, who was known for his comedic timing in class, included homemade coupons: one free laugh, one free joke, one free day of imagining you are a superhero. Those small attempts at silliness were precious. Ms. Rhodes tucked them all carefully into a large box and added a plush toy reindeer for good measure, hoping that even if Sawyer was feeling too ill to read everything at once, he would know how many people were rooting for him. At the start of the new year, Ms. Rhodes received a call from Sawyer's mother. Sawyer had a big procedure coming up, and the doctors weren't entirely sure how successful it would be. It was scheduled for a Friday morning. Could you ask the kids to think about him that day?" the mother asked softly. "He loves their letters, and it might give him courage." Ms. Rhodes nodded into the phone, her voice catching. "Of course. We'll do that. We'll do whatever we can." That Thursday, Ms. Rhodes stood before the class, explaining the gravity of Sawyer's procedure. There was a new solemnity in the room. They all knew he wasn't just some pen pal, he was their friend, their little brother in spirit, the bright-eyed boy who found hope in their words. One by one, each student volunteered to write something meaningful for him. Naomi wrote a letter in the style of a bedtime story, describing a brave knight named Sawyer fighting a dragon named Fear. James wrote a short motivational chant. Sapphire wrote a promise that she'd invite Sawyer to watch a live soccer match with her family once he got better. Amelia drew a world map with dotted lines ending at the hospital, as if saying, "We are all here, dotting the same world, waiting for you." All these letters went into a new box, which Miss Rhodes delivered to the hospital on Thursday afternoon. That night, Miss Rhodes lay awake, anxious about what was about to happen in the hospital the next morning. She tried to picture Sawyer's mother pacing the corridors, racked with worry. She tried to remember that sometimes words have power beyond what we can comprehend. She silently prayed that the love in those letters would protect Sawyer like a shining force. Friday came and went with no news. It wasn't until Monday morning that Miss Rhodes got word. Sawyer's mother sent a quick text message. "Surgery was difficult, but he made it. Recovery will be long, but doctors are hopeful." Miss Rhodes relayed the news to her students. Their cheers echoed through the halls. Although Sawyer was far from out of the woods, that glimmer of hope was enough to spark celebration. Time ticked by with cautious optimism. By early spring, Sawyer had gained enough strength to endure limited visits from close family friends. Ms. Rhodes had an idea. What if she arranged for a select group of students, those whose parents gave permission, to visit Sawyer? Perhaps meeting face to face would strengthen that bond forged on paper. The hospital agreed, as long as visits were short. Ms. Rhodes proposed it to her class, and an enthusiastic group formed, including Naomi, James, and Amelia. On the day of the visit, Miss Rhodes loaded them into her minivan. The kids carried small gifts, stuffed animals, homemade get-well cards, a new supply of letters. As they walked through the hospital corridors, Miss Rhodes could sense their nervous excitement. Hospitals can be intimidating places for children. Drab corridors, full of tension and sorrow, but they came with a purpose, to bring joy. They reached Sawyer's room. There he was, propped up on pillows. Although he still looked frail and had tubes snaking around his bed, his face erupted into a huge grin when he saw them. The quiet beeping of machines provided a rhythm to the moment. He looked older now, as though his experiences had aged him beyond his years, but he was still unmistakably the boy whose spirit shimmered in his giant, grateful eyes. Naomi was the first to approach. "Hi," she said shyly, holding out a little plush dragon reminiscent of her stationary doodles. "I'm Naomi. You read my letters with the castles and dragons. I wanted to give you this." Sawyer's trembling hands reached out, accepting the plush toy as if it were a golden treasure. "I love it," he whispered. James spoke next. "I wrote the baseball letters. I hope you like them." Sawyer nodded. "Sometimes I imagine I'm in a baseball game, about to hit a home run. It helps me forget how scary some of these procedures are." Naomi, James, and Amelia introduced themselves one by one. The group spent a short but memorable half-hour with Sawyer, asking about the hospital and how he felt. They told him tiny snippets about their own lives. Naomi confessed she was practicing for the upcoming school choir audition. James described a big baseball match, and Amelia excitedly mentioned how she planned to study for a geography B. They left the room feeling a mix of elation and gravity, tears in their eyes at the sight of how ill he still was, but encouraged by the resilience in him. Over the following months, a fresh round of letters renewed the class's resolve to keep Sawyer company in spirit. Eventually, late spring arrived, bringing warmer breezes and the faint promise of summer. Miss Rhodes regularly kept in touch with Sawyer's mother, who reported steady progress. The grandmother's crocheted blanket, the jokes scribbled on cards, the poems, and the soccer drawings had become Sawyer's faithful companions. Around the time final exams approached, Miss Rhodes made an announcement that made the students' hearts leap. "Sawyer's mother just told me that the doctors say he may come home in a few weeks if he continues to improve. He'll still need regular checkups, but he'll get a break from these four walls." The entire class erupted in cheers. Enough time had passed that Miss Rhodes's seventh graders were older and wiser than they were at the start of the year. Many of them carried the memory of letter writing as a testament to what compassion could do. Some had begun pen pal friendships with kids in other countries. Others were volunteering with local charities. Seeds of empathy had sprouted far beyond anything Ms. Rhodes had initially imagined. A few weeks later, on a bright Saturday afternoon, Ms. Rhodes was invited by Sawyer's mother to be present for his homecoming. They walked him out of the hospital, carefully wheeling him in a chair until they reached the exit. Then Sawyer stood, leaning on his father for support, a gentle sun warming his face for the first time in many months. Naomi and James had secretly tagged along with Miss Rhodes, each holding small homemade welcome home banners. The moment Sawyer saw them, he laughed a raw, joyful sound. Beneath his frail exterior, his spirit shone like a brand new beacon. Though he still faced a long road with physical therapy and ongoing treatments, each step forward was fueled by hope. That day, as Miss Rhodes caught Sawyer looking at Naomi's banner, she remembered how it had all started with a single idea: letters. Words on paper, small glimpses of hearts connecting, was all it took to lift a child in darkness. The teacher realized how often, in the hustle of everyday assignments and tests, they forgot that language wasn't just about grammar and reading comprehension. Sometimes it was a lifeline. The Monday after Sawyer's homecoming, Ms. Rhodes found a hush over her classroom. Students were eager for an update, but she thought she'd surprise them by telling them about the homecoming celebration in detail. She described the sunshine, the playful banners, the tears of joy in Sawyer's mother's eyes. Everyone listened intently. She concluded with, "Sawyer told me to tell you something. Thank you for giving me hope and reminding me that I'm not alone." Lily, a quiet girl in the front row, raised her hand. "Ms. Rhodes, do you think we can keep writing letters to other kids in the hospital? Maybe they need hope too." Ms. Rhodes smiled, warmed by the suggestion, and saw other heads nodding eagerly. "I think that's an excellent idea. We can talk to the hospital staff and see who else might want pen pals. Words travel beyond the boundaries we expect. They mean a lot more than just a grade." In the space of a few months, Ms. Rhodes' class had exceeded basic language arts to learn a deeper lesson. Words could heal, encourage, and transform. They had seen it happen in real time. It wasn't just about Sawyer anymore. It was about every potential Sawyer out there who needed a letter, a spark, a friend. By the time the school year came to an end, Ms. Rhodes held back tears at the final assembly. When she spoke briefly of the project that her class had taken on, she wanted each student to know that they had made a tangible difference, knitting a bond with someone separated by age, environment, and difficulty. They had done it in the simplest of ways, by sharing their stories, their jokes, their hope through letters. That day, the entire school gave them a standing ovation. What started as a small assignment had revealed how deeply hearts could connect when kindness was involved. Summer break scattered the students in different directions. Some went away to stay with relatives, others to camps, but many insisted on leaving a stash of fresh letters with Miss Rhodes to pass on to the hospital. She, in turn, kept close contact with her cousin, the nurse, ensuring that any child in the pediatric wing could receive a letter from a friend at Springwood Middle School. A month into summer break, Miss Rhodes sat on her couch, sipping a cup of chamomile tea. She scrolled through her inbox and spotted a new email from Sawyer's mother. The subject line read, "Sawyer's progress." With a hopeful heart, she opened it. Inside was a photo of Sawyer, no longer looking so frail, standing on his own 2 feet in a park with his parents on either side. A large grin spread across his face. Mrs. Rhodes pressed a hand to her chest, overcome with emotion as she read the words his mother had typed. "He's finally home, with the trees and blue sky he's missed all this time. He's regaining stamina. He told me he wants to start writing letters back to each student again when school starts." Miss Rhodes smiled softly. She remembered that day in the classroom, how it all began with a single assignment. Her chest swelled with pride, gratitude, and awe at the unassuming power of words to act as beams of light in someone's darkest hours. She thought of the students' letters, each one a lamp of compassion shining on Sawyer's path. And now those letters would continue to shine, not only for him, but for countless others who needed a reminder that they were not alone. In her mind, Ms. Rhodes pictured Sawyer walking into a future that included the laughs, stories, and kindness of newfound friends, friends he had never physically met until later, but whose hearts had been connected to his through the pages of stories, jokes, and promises of a better tomorrow. She recalled one line from a letter Toby wrote, "Even if your room is dark, our words are a lantern you can hold. You're never alone." Indeed, that lantern had burned steadily, helping Sawyer walk through a tunnel that at times had seemed endless. The next school year would bring a new group of seventh graders, fresh faces, fresh perspectives. Ms. Rhodes knew she would introduce herself on the very first day, just like she always did, telling them about the wonders of language. But this time, she knew she'd share one story from the start, how a small act of writing and empathy transformed a boy named Sawyer, a classroom of students, and a teacher who believed that letters could truly bring light into the darkest battles. After all, every new student should understand that one heartfelt sentence can ripple out and illuminate corners of the world you never even knew existed. And that is a lesson no grammar worksheet could ever match.